Welcome back to Urban X-Files. My name is Keith, and seeing as though this is October, I thought I would give a story of trick or treat. When I was younger, my group of friends and I used to go trick or treating every Halloween. Now, we'd known each other since school, a young school, since infant school, so we'd been doing this for many years. Our parents had always gone with us until we were old enough when we could finally go by ourselves. We did promise that we'd be good and we'd only go to the houses in our local area. And we readily agreed, and off we went, excited by going out on our own. That year, we were all going as our favourite superheroes: Superman, Batman, etc. We was all dressed up and my mates were there, and we were ready to go and have some fun. Our parents gave us all this typical talk about not talking to strangers, and we got the whole palaver. Now, after the speech had finished and our parents had said what we can and can't do, off we went. Now, we just started walking away when we seen a little kid who was dressed in a ghost outfit just along the street. Now, it was just a sheet with some holes in the eye sockets, nothing very imaginative, and it was just standing there with a pumpkin bucket at the end of the path. Now, I would have said by the size of this kid, they'd be around 7, 8 years old. So we thought they were definitely too young to be out on their own. But there was no adults around and nobody else. So I thought, oh, maybe they're lost. So we went over to talk to them. Hey, are you okay? Are you on your own? Have you lost your parents? And all that I could see was these bright eyes staring back at me. But this, for some reason I've never been able to explain, was terrified. And as the kid didn't answer, we figured that the kid was shy and he was told not to talk to strangers as we were. And I asked the kid its name, and I also introduced myself and my friends. But there was no sound from this kid, and it was just like as if this kid was a mute. And given that we were dressed up as superheroes, I wasn't going to just leave the kid there all by itself. So I grabbed hold of his hand and tried to lead him along with us so we could see if we could get one of our parents to help. Now, when I grabbed the kid's hand and I felt it through the sheet, it felt as if the kid was made of ice, as it was so cold. Like, it was so strange that it was autumn and it wasn't really cold outside, because we lived in a place where it just wasn't cold then. It was ice cold. So we walked down the block and we'd done everything we could to get this little kid to talk, but he remained silent. Now, every time we go up to a door of a house and knock and say trick or treat, this kid would refuse to move an inch down the walkway to get the sweets. The bucket didn't have a single piece of sweet in it, and it just seems sad. I mean, why go out trick-or-treating if you aren't going out to get any sweets, is all I could think of. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed to make sense. This kid was out there all by themselves and wouldn't even talk to another kid, not to mention trying to go to a stranger's house to knock on the door for sweets. Now, as the night began to come to a close, I was unsure what to do about our ghost friend. We hadn't seen anyone out looking for a lost kid, and it wasn't like he didn't stand out with his costume being a sheet. And once we'd gone to the last house, we decided we'd make a decision that he'd come back to my house so that our parents would be able to know what to do. So it wasn't like they'd get mad because it was a child and it wasn't exactly a stranger. It was just a kid in a costume. So it was a lost kid. So what were we meant to do? Anyway, not wanting the kid to go home empty-handed, I convinced my friends to share out the sweets and put some in his bag. And although they all weren't happy about it because they thought they're the one who went knocking, so why should they share? But they reluctantly agreed, and they took bits of sweets out of each of their bag and placed it in the ghost's. Now, as tradition that we leave the kids' house that we start at until last, thinking that we will be able to share out the remaining treats, and that was left that hadn't been claimed. And we walk up to the door of our house, and I was about to knock and say trick or treat, and I wanted the ghost to at least have a chance to go to at least one house to say trick or treat. So I grabbed the kid's hand and we walked up to the steps of our front door, and I asked the ghost if they want to press the doorbell. But all we got is a shake of the head, like this, saying no. And not wanting to wait any longer, one of my friends ran up and pressed the bell. Now, my mum comes to the door with a big bowl of treats, ready to start dishing them out. And she gets this weird look on her face when she sees me. I don't really know why she's looking at me so weird. What's the matter? Why are you dragging that sheet around with you? She looks ahead and bends it and couldn't make sense. I don't know what you're talking about. It's not like the greatest costume, but the kid was obviously young and, you know, there was some silly costume, so we didn't think. So I told her that we found the kid that was standing there with me on the sidewalk and we didn't want to leave him alone. So you took their ghost costume off him and ran off with the kid and left the kid there with no costume. That's mean. Why would you do that? And she looked as though she was about to get angry. Now, when we turned round to look at the kid, all that was in my hand was a white sheet. Now, his bag of treats was still sat on the ground like it had been placed there so it wouldn't tip over. And the sheet lay in a pile on the ground with me holding one of the corners. And I started to shiver and stutter because I couldn't understand that we'd been trick-or-treating with this kid and the kid had been there at our house with my friends. No, he couldn't have taken off his sheet and left. It was if he'd vanished. So I stood there with a sheet and his sweet bag and a kid that had disappeared. Now, we don't know for sure if this was a ghost, but with the cold hand and not speaking, it's made me wonder, was this a kid who'd been killed and come to trick or treat? I don't know if we will ever find out. And I have to say that was the last time I went trick-or-treating without one of my parents. Now, a few years later, the kid had found on Google he'd done his research and he'd put in ghost stories, and for whatever reason he found in his neighborhood, they found an old newspaper article of a child that had been knocked over and killed on Halloween when he went trick-or-treating. As the kid was with his family, and so his mum, his dad and his siblings, and he had wanted to be a ghost. This must have been like 20 years before us. And then we found that this kid that was dressed as a ghost was in the same road as where we found him. He was killed there in that spot from a drunk driver. So the kid in the story that I read in the article was only 6 years old and had
if we let go again, you can see that the camera is constantly falling to
he was that excited he came running out across the street to go to the next house and was struck by this car and killed instantly. So what do you think of today's story? Do you think it had some truth? Or do you think it was all just a child's ghost story? You decide. Thank you for watching.